Well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sir Bob Harvey. I used to be the mayor of my town. I wish I'd been the mayor here. But I didn't quite make it. But you did, and you're here. I'd like to ask Ben to open with a cut here for us. Start, and then I'll introduce Ben.
Ngā kete o te wānanga, ko te kete tua uri, ko te kete tuatia, ko te kete aramu. Ka tiritiri a, ka paupau a, ki papatu a nuku, ka puta. Te ira tangata ki te whai a, ki te amaru. Whanno, whanno, taramai te toki. Aumi e, hui e, tai e. Me uri ki te iwa, ko ia te timtanga me te mutanga, o ngā mea katoa. Nō reira, ko hoi aku tōna hinga tapu. Ki ngā tine mate, o tēnā iwi, haere atura, haere atura. Haere atura ki waiki nui, ki waiki roa, ki waiki whamama. Upo mai rā kata, i te ahiri mō wai o ngā atu. Kia ora koutou, just a short karakia, ki te atua, to God, and of course, acknowledging those that have gone before us.
This is a really special moment. A special moment for you, a special moment for the minister, the missionaries. So we're here to talk to you, to listen to you, to hear your questions, and hopefully give you answers. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of the two beloved fathers. I'd like to acknowledge them for their courage, for their belief in volunteer work, community spirit, and their belief in you. We didn't know what would happen when we saw, firstly, Dan the weatherman telling us there was a cyclone drifting by in Fiji. We didn't know that it would come with such force. We didn't know it had come with the devil's plan. I personally thought it would come down the East Coast. I never thought it would come down past my beloved West Coast, your beloved West Coast. But it did. And it dealt us such a blow that we will probably live with for the rest of our lives. I honestly believe our lives have changed. My lives have changed. At Karika, I'm just down the road a bit. But here, your lives have been changed. I think maybe it's easy to say for the next 10 years for our life. And so it's great to welcome the minister here and see, look and hear. So that is why we're here. This moment belongs to you, the Muriwai community. You're brave, you're strong, you're resilient. You know all this. I'm not support, transport, and minister for you, people of Muriwai.
Kia ora koutou katoa. E whakawhetai ana ki te kaihanga, e mihi ana ki te tangata, te kaihanga, tēnā koe. individuals and communities as we go through that process. It's enormously complex for a number of reasons. First is that we have multiple people who are involved and have stake. Yourselves potentially as the people who actually own and live in properties, most importantly. We've also got insurance companies, banks, local government and central government. We've all got a role to play in that conversation, and we've got to try and make sure that we pull all of those parties along together. Secondly, it's complex because we're dealing with a multiplicity of different situations. People in some of these areas, it might be you, it might not be, who want to get out and find somewhere else to go. We've got people who want to stay in the same community and want to know what the options are to achieve that. And so as we take that process forward, we're going to have to deal with what's real for people and what you want as well. What we also have to do is make sure that we manage the current situation we're dealing with in a way that sets us up well for the future. So the government's had a policy process underway to look at this complicated issue of managed retreat, and in a very sort of orderly and logical way, we're due to get a report back from James Shaw, the Minister for Climate Change, a bit later this year that will set out a broader policy framework in this area. The challenge we have now is that you're living through this situation and we need to provide support and clarity for you now. And so the additional complexity here is that we need to provide that support and clarity to you, but we also need to do so carefully and in a way that doesn't set wrong precedents for the future and puts us on the right track, because we are going to get more of these weather events in the future. These issues will keep arising. So those are all of the complexities that we're trying to balance within that situation. But what we've recognised through the Emergency Weather Response Committee is that there is a degree of urgency around this. So Grant Robertson has actually just put out a statement today in which he has provided some information about the next steps that we're taking in this area. The first thing that we have done is tasked the task force that we've set up, which has been led by Sir Brian Roach, to work with insurers to get out on the ground and as rapidly as possible, and we're talking most likely in a period of weeks, to provide us with a solid risk assessment across key areas where we know that these issues have arisen. The issue that we've got is we haven't had a solid base of information to make decisions. So the idea is we get that information that the task force is bringing together with the information the local government has, we work together so that we have a really clear picture as to the different risk situations that we are facing here at Muriwai, different parts of Auckland and right around the country. That then enables us to have a base of information to start making decisions. At the same time, we've asked our officials across a range of different government departments, primarily Treasury and the Ministry of Environment, to as rapidly as possible begin providing advice to government about what we might then do with that information as we deal with this issue of managed retreat in real time. So if I can just give you assurance that while I can't give you all of the answers around that today, there is a process that we are bringing together as rapidly as possible to get information on the table, to give us options about what we can do in a way that is fair and equitable and gets the precedents right, so that we can give clarity as much as possible. One of the things that Grant's noted in the release he's put out today is that in some not dissimilar situations in Australia over the last few years, they've usually taken around about 4 or 5 months from event to getting some outcomes for people in this managed retreat process. That's because it is complex. We're going to work quite hard to try and do it faster than that, because we know it's incredibly stressful to live through this. So if I can just pass on that assurance that we're working through that process as quickly as possible, and we'll perhaps arrange to make sure that that statement from Grant Robertson is circulated around so you can see exactly what we are proposing there. Beyond that, I just want to acknowledge all of you for the way that you have been engaging as we can in the coming period. So please, again, just note that that's a real priority for us. We know that that's often the immediate need for people, and we're continuing to work closely with council and other authorities on that as well. Those probably are the, I think, most useful things that I can say at the outset of this discussion. Beyond that, I'm really keen that we just probably now move into questions and discussion for you to let us know the things that you think that we need to know. And if I can just, again, I guess, provide the assurance that at all levels of government, central government, local government, across all of our agencies, we are working as hard as we can to prioritise these complex issues and try and get the support to you as quickly as we can. So look, can I thank you all for coming along. I know that many of you have been badly affected by this situation, and it's really tough. And we want to work with you as closely as we can and listen to you as we work out responses that help you, your whānau, and this community to rebuild. So thank you all, and very happy now to open up to questions and discussion. Reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you. Perhaps Bob, if I can ask you.
Please.
Sorry, I was just sitting down. I missed the start of your question.
A 50-50 buyout from the government and council with undamaged property.
Yeah. Look, just before I've come here, I've taken a full tour around with our team. So very aware that one of the issues that you face here are a large number of properties that haven't actually had significant damage occur to them, but are not necessarily places that you want to go back to live in. Exactly, but even if that red sticker came off, there might be some of you who don't feel good about that. So very aware that that is an issue. That is something that we will consider as a part of this process. I can't give you a specific answer yet. But as a part of the advice that is coming back to us from Cabinet, we have asked for options from officials. We've asked them to look at other managed retreat processes, which do include some buyout processes in overseas jurisdictions, such as Australia. We've got some recent examples to draw off. So I can't rule that specifically in, but I can give you the assurance that we are looking at that suite of options to try and provide as much ability for people to be able to move on with their lives.
Is it true that in this situation was just they can't do anything and neither can insurance, so we rely entirely 50-50.
Yeah.
We have no other choice. Is that seems to be the viable situation?
Yeah. Well, you're basically right about the situations as pertain to EQC and insurance. If there hasn't been damage to the property, we understand that it's a situation you find yourselves in. So that's why we recognise that's a particular subset of the situations we're dealing with that we're also going to need to.
Council lands in danger.
Yeah.
So that was why in Christchurch the council got 50-50 option. Was that not true?
That is broadly what happened in Christchurch. There is a bit of a difference. One of the things that we're just working through within this, simplifying a little bit, but broadly speaking, in Christchurch there was a compulsory process which took place. Red zoning occurred in Christchurch, and it largely wasn't something that was determined by individual property owners. It was a pretty centrally driven decision. One of the things that we are wanting to work through in this situation, because it is a little bit different, is to have an approach that is more nuanced based on what's actually happening for individual property owners.
Michael, could I ask you to read that question?
Of course.
For the mic, we're just recording this with your permission. Thank you.
So maybe you can provide some more specific information about financial support from many of us here, paying mortgages, paying rents, and tax as well. And obviously our insurance payments will cover so much, then we're on our own under that, but hopefully not. And we go to the precedent up in Christchurch that there was accommodation support provided. Can you provide some more specifics on that?
Yeah, sure. So the question, if anyone didn't pick that up, was effectively about the range of financial supports that might be available to people who are finding it difficult at the moment, with some reference to Christchurch. So you're right in identifying, kind of listing off the things that perhaps some of you are getting support, some people are getting support from at the moment, a mix of insurance. Some of you might have been able to draw down from the civil defence payment as well after the event initially occurred. And then, of course, what we are trying to provide is, as much as possible, with as much speed as we can, are other accommodation options to try and take some of that burden off people. The question that you're really raising is, well, when all's said and done, those supports might be in place, and there might still be people who are facing costs over the coming weeks and months. We don't quite know how you're going to meet that. So that is something that we are really happy to look at. There's not a specific additional policy that's there at the moment that caters for these kinds of situations. Thank you very much. And again, the question here really was about the finite amount of insurance payments that some people have got. School. We've had a large number of red sticker houses there. So this is an issue I've been working through with constituents there. Commonly, people talk to me about having insurance policies that might provide 20, 25, 30,000, that kind of zone of cover for that kind of support. And we know that will provide a reasonable amount of support for accommodation and basic costs for a period, but after a number of months, you start to worry, and that's understandable. So absolutely, yes, that's something I'm really happy to take back and look at what assurance we can provide as soon as we can.
So I'm coming to you.
Yeah, quick question around the same sort of thing. Obviously the KiwiSaver hardship access, something we've talked about. And it's probably more the question of when would you suggest that we could apply successfully to that, you know, in the context of insurance running out, if it's 6 months from now, 3 months from now, because I believe some people have tried and haven't been successful with it. But it's obviously, you know, it's another lever that we have available to us, which doesn't, you know, mean going to the bank and sort of paying more and accessing funds that we worked for and earned in the past.
So again, just for the benefit of everyone, the question there around access to KiwiSaver through reasonable hardship. Obviously, that provision is built there into the KiwiSaver scheme. When you say that some people have applied and haven't got there yet, is that because you're hearing that people have been declined, or just that they haven't heard back yet? Can I just clarify that?
I wouldn't speak others, but I believe it was declined.
Okay.
So I think, you know, it's in general across everything, you say treat us as individuals, but then what that means is we have an individual journey with a call centre with 10 people that don't know what we're talking about until we get to someone that does. And in the same way, if you save a release, if we as individuals all had to go through the same process rather than maybe one person being appointed that understands our situation, is a lot better for us.
Okay.
Because, you know, all of us who have gone through the same hoops can get very tired and can add hugely distress. So, you know, the question is, how can you make it? Yeah, I understand the process.
Yep.
Understand individual, but there must be ways where, as a group, as a government, it takes the pressure off this.
Yeah, okay. I'm very happy to pick up on that. I think there are probably two things here. One is whether there's some way of making that process easier, simpler, less stressful, burdensome for people to engage in. So we'll have a bit of a look at that. I would always encourage, if people are finding those processes challenging, not to put people on the spot, but local MPs, please do feel free to approach your local MPs offices. We know a lot of you are dealing with a lot of stuff at the moment. So please just don't be afraid to reach out. Our offices are here in local areas to provide that kind of support when you're dealing with these sorts of things. So feel free to do that. But we'll have a bit of a think more generally about whether there's anything there. Probably the other pertinent issue here that we will need to go back, have a look at, get some advice on, are actually the criteria. So the hardship criteria from drawing down from KiwiSaver, you're right, they are relatively stringent, and you can understand why that's in there. It's basically to prevent people from dipping into KiwiSaver at any old time. It needs to be sort of a genuine emergency, because the purpose of the scheme is to help people save, right? So the individual providers will probably say, we need to do a bit of due diligence. We need to understand that we haven't got any other options, that you've exhausted other savings, et cetera, et cetera. That probably feels a bit difficult to hear in the particular circumstances that you're in. So that is probably something that we need to go back and have a little bit of a look at whether that policy setting is appropriate for this situation and whether it's advisable for us to have a look at. And I'm very happy to do that.
Can I go back to you, and then we'll come back.
Responsible, or the council doesn't hold themselves responsible to land a regional park that actually maybe wasn't maintained as it should have been, the water system, or
Well, councils are effectively set up under the Local Government Act. And that sets up effectively the things that local government can and can't do, its responsibility to residents in its areas, how it should consult, what it can and can't do. Those sorts of things are in the Local Government Act.
Landslip situation.
Yeah.
What are they specific?
Yeah. Not specifically within that legislation. So they have I mean, a council is a body that has accountabilities in the same way that any other body has legal accountability. So they're accountable for how they use the resources under the RMA, for example. They're accountable under the Health and Safety at Work Act in the same way that other entities are. So all of those sort of responsibilities that apply to other organisations, businesses and central government apply to local government as well. Ultimately, as residents and ratepayers, you can test those things directly with the council and ultimately through legal mechanisms if you think appropriate. Of course, it's always better to try and work them out prior to that. But I might just say to Phil if there's any additional context, and obviously there's a particular issue here around landslips and regional parks.
Phil Wilson of Auckland. Phil, please join us.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. First of all, I'm Phil. I'm one of Council's directors and have been asked recently to lead the recovery function for the region. Okay, so that's where I sit, and behind me I've got a number of other people from the building and geotech and so on perspective. So just seizing a moment to say that we'll hang around afterwards. This is the ministers' meeting. We'll hang around afterwards, and if there are specific questions for the council, then grab us, and I'll introduce my colleagues maybe a little bit later. Look, here's probably not the forum for me to sort of provide a whole lot of ad hoc legal advice around some of the stuff. Council does have a duty of care. We've got to look after things. That's fair to say. But the question of sort of legal liability is a pretty complex area, and I'm not going to start sort of spouting forth what it looks like in different situations. Okay, but I'm really happy to have a discussion with everyone who feels that they've got a particular issue that they need to work through with the council in terms of adjoining land and overland flow for stormwater and so on. These are issues we're dealing with a lot in relation to the 1,300 slips that are around the region.
I'm sounding like Phil, but we'll keep it that.
Very well.
I think someone over here. Thank you.
Just
No,
following
thank you.
on from the Kiwi sailor discussion, is there any ability to give any direct bank things as well? I understand they were able to do a bit more probably in Christchurch. They don't appear to have much help right now.
Are you talking about
So they're saying
Direct
that
financial
you
help?
potentially have a mortgage deferment that you're going to owe a lot
Sure.
more after 3 months or whatever. And then you're getting more allowances that they're able to provide in Christchurch situation, and how we can go about trying to get that to happen through government.
Okay, great. So the question there around what are the options for encouraging
The options are right. No. Oh.
one direction up. But I have not had one new amenity on my street in 31 years. We don't even have town water. We don't have septic. We've had no council member clean our drain, look at storm water. And then for some reason, and I can't understand it, when the top houses started to be built on top of the wall, or higher, at the top there, they weren't allowed to have their stormwater or their rainwater go out to the council drain. They had to go to the side and they all came onto our houses. So if you look at a lot of the slips that we are seeing, a lot of that is infrastructure. It's neglected council property. It's neglected council park, trees. It's a lack of drains. It's a lack of management in stormwater and management of stormwater. I'm one of the houses that my house is absolutely fine and I'm very blessed. But unfortunately, I have a slip on my immediate right and I have a slip 2 doors down. So I understand that it may take 3 to 6 months to address these slips. But in the meantime, if there's another big storm and those slips become worse, it means my house and other houses may go with those slips. So just as a long-term in the equation there, long-term, something needs to be done about stormwater in Muriwai. Our drains need to be unplugged and fixed. So that, no, they're not.
We've been to Cyclone to ask them to clean our drains because they were full up. And if that isn't done in the next few days before the rains, you're going to have an even bigger problem. And so I don't see why that can't be done and why it hasn't been done.
Well, I've done with my own, got shut down, we help.
Right.
Yeah, well, look, good maintenance of assets is really important. What you're describing to me is not too dissimilar to a visit I had just after the original floods down to Pukekohe, where the onion growers are. Now, those people that it was the worst of possible times. They just effectively dug up the onion crop. They then lay it on the ground to dry out in the January sun. And it was just after that the floods ripped through. And the comment that they provided to me was that about 20 years ago, there'd been a relatively extensive stormwater system that had been set up in the area after the previous big flooding event. A big system of culverts, diversions, and other things like that. And their view was that it hadn't been maintained at that point. Now, probably had it been properly maintained, it would have been unlikely to have stopped all damage, but it might have mitigated it somewhat. And that probably is the way to look at this. It is really important to maintain those assets. I'm sure that some of those folks who are staying around afterwards, let's make sure we pick up that conversation about where you're seeing those issues. We've got to do that. We need to, as we do the rebuild from this here and across the country, using the phrase build back better, making sure that the infrastructure is going to be fit for purpose for more of these events. So I'm sorry, we're likely to have more climate change induced events. That regretfully is the world that we are in. So we need to make sure that infrastructure is resilient as possible. That will cost, we're going to have to work through that. The other piece though is that we can do all of that and build really resilient infrastructure, that the power of some of these events will still mean that there is sometimes going to be real damage. And that is where we need to get into the hard, gritty conversation about where we're building and where the safe places are to have facilities and homes, because the sheer volumes of water and some of the forces that we had unleashed twice across the country in the first couple of months, I've got to be honest, no matter how good the infrastructure and the maintenance had been, in some cases we still would have had massive floods, huge amounts of flooding and large amounts of damage. So we've got to do all of those things together to keep people as safe as possible.
Very good.
I have one comment and one question. The comment is that post the earthquakes in Christchurch, what I understand is that people who are in our situation really have that they were to be out of their homes. My question is around the cyclone recovery task force that's been set up to ensure local led recovery. Would we be given a single point of contact in that task force so that we can liaise with them should that happens?
Thank you. Again, I'll just repeat the question for the benefit of everyone else. It's about getting a single point of contact for the recovery task force. Yes, very happy to set that up for you. One of the things that I've asked of the task force is that we do a little bit of work to set up a
Men who would not go. In fact, as those who were Ellie or Suzanne said, asked first. Yeah, and that was our policy in that right 10 years ago. And that's what he was doing. And then you know, there's still these examples that pop up like much.
Leading that, a formal recovery manager has been appointed, but as much as possible, we're wanting to work very closely with the council structure so that, for example, when you think about the range of supports that you might need in your situation, that we know what council's doing, we know what the gaps are, we know what role we might be able to play. So I just wanted to provide that assurance that, yep, council's going to be looking at those things, but we're sort of sitting alongside them in that recovery structure to make sure that we're each covering off the different ways in which we can provide support. Rates might be something they can do, might be other things that we can do.
It's good you said that one and then three.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch back on some future plans. Obviously, we're going through things at the moment. My house is less ticket, hopefully that'll change. But moving forward with Muriwai, obviously the geotechs and everybody's analysing what's happened, LiDAR, all of that, we all know where the springs are, where the water's coming out. It's no surprise to residents, but obviously moving forward, I hope that there's some plan of managing that water that's coming out of the ground, some plan of managing the huge pines that have grown up along the ridges that have caused a lot of issues. The stormwater is being discussed. I just want to know that future thinking is happening and who's doing it, how it happens, where we're going to end up in the future so that we can still live in our community with some assurance.
Yeah. Just again, sorry, the question here effectively is about broad-based future resilience planning, whether it relates to water, large pines on the bridge, other things that might create risk in the future for you. Ultimately, what you're saying is we want to minimise the risks that apply to people in the future, and you want to have confidence that you can live here as safely as possible. The broad answer has to be yes. If we don't do that work, then fundamentally we've failed as a system to learn out of the magnitude of these events. So it's very much on our agenda. A lot of the time when people are talking about resilience and building back better, they're often talking about quite hard and specific stuff like roads, but actually what you're saying is there are a lot of other things that we have to consider as a part of that. Water is a huge part of it. It is something our government has had a bit of focus on over the last couple of years and has sometimes taken a little bit of chip for it. I've got to say, we feel that some of the arguments for water reform have perhaps been slightly reinforced over the last few weeks. We've got to land it right for people. But those other really practical things will often be quite local. So you have that knowledge in your community about trees, for example, and about springs in particular locations. So in our response, we're going to have to link up with local communities. in the work stream that Phil and the team are leading, the recovery work stream, one of the areas that's specifically there is actually that point around looking ahead and thinking about what ground level resilience means for communities. So yes, there's a lot of detail we're going to have to work through to get there, but absolutely on board to do that. I don't know if there's anything you want to
And then going over back to you and
Council will be of help.
Discuss with my colleague over here. Reason and a duty of care to have them on limbs, then that'll be what drives red stickers on limbs. But the ones that were originally done through rapid assessments and have now become white, they will not be on limbs.
I missed you at the back, so yeah, and then I'm coming back to you. Can you
Brandon can come along and we've got this task force moving forward with a lot of new policies and that. I just wonder where it's in the equity of the perception of when someone pays an EQC insurance, what they actually receive. So currently a lot of dealers think when they purchase EQC, they're getting their property insured, but in reality, they don't. There's all little rules, 8 meters from the property and all that sort of thing. So people are asked, mentioned to them, no, I'm not covering the EQC. So it is the government actually the validity of the fairness of how EQC is sold. Ultimately, we have to purchase that insurance, but it doesn't actually give us much of a return.
Yep.
So I think it's under the fair trading, they're on bridge.
Okay.
Of what they're selling.
Thanks. So questions about the fairness and the scope of EQC cover. Right at this particular moment of time, the straight up answer is no, we don't have any work underway to look at that, but I wouldn't rule it out. So for example, that is one of the things that we did look at after the experience of Christchurch, and we did make some changes to it, including increasing the scope of cover and making changes to focus it in on land rather than contents which were there. And that was learning in terms of what had come out of Christchurch. So it would not be uncommon or unexpected that after an event like this, you go back and you say, were the tools fit for purpose at the time? So I wouldn't rule that out. I'm happy to take that on as feedback. I mean, I would say that the way that EQC is set out in terms of what it does cover and doesn't cover, it is sort of there in black and white. Probably the reality is that most of us don't go and delve particularly deeply into it at the time, right? But it is also an area where we would hope and expect that there is some good information and education that comes through from insurers, who are often the people who are actually dealing with, and that's how you cover it, that's a mechanism. So it could be that there's some work to be done there to at the very least ensure that people have good awareness as to what's covered and what isn't covered as a part of that process. And then you've got the ability to make decisions beyond that, knowing what the case is. So happy to take that on as feedback. I'd be very surprised if we didn't look at this as a part of the wash up post this event.
now, Madam, and can I come back to you? Did I miss you? Sorry. Please.
I've listened to people asking questions about the banks in the community. And that's all very well and good, but that's their money for retirement, and that's their savings. And at the end of the day, if they get a mortgage holiday, they'll still pay higher interest, and it will come at 10 points. Now, all of us, or most of us here, I'm sure, are ratepayers, taxpayers, and insurance payers. But I know I am. I pay insurance, I pay an exceedingly on that. Now, I'm going to be asked to leave my land because it's too dangerous. And who's going to cover me? You can't be saying I can't opt out of paying EQC limit on my insurance. I pay. Now, I'm not really very interested in the weasel words and the difference between damage and loss. My house might not be damaged, but if I can't go and live back there, I have lost it. And I've insured everything I ever own. I'm a responsible citizen. Why am I dropping through every crack there is? Why are you not here for me? How about selling my gold, Van Gogh, whatever? Sell the art. Sell the art. Give it to all the people who are struggling right now. So,
Let's sell the goldies and let's move on. Yeah. I do want to answer today's question. Thank you for the question. I understand why you might be feeling at the moment that you're in a bit of a gap. And I think the honest answer is that you are in a bit of a gap. Insurers have policies which you have purchased that apply to certain situations. EQC, which you pay for, applies to certain situations. What has happened as a result of these unprecedented events is that we've got a whole lot of situations, and you've got a particular concentration of them here, which probably just aren't covered by those areas. Now, if you think that, yes, that's what I want to speak to. Now, the first thing I want to say is that if you're getting into a situation where you think you aren't getting a fair deal from your insurer who you are dealing with, and you think there was a legitimate issue that needs looking at, one of the things that we have specifically fast-tracked and set up as an insurance resolution service. This is one of the situations that we have in Christchurch where a lot of people fell foul with the insurance companies. It was an incredibly stressful time. They just felt David and Goliath. When we came into government, we set up a resolution service to give people an independent, neutral place to go who would help you deal with those issues. We've now set that up, so you've got somewhere that you can go if you need help dealing with your insurer. So I just say that as the first point, that we acknowledge there can be issues there, and that's some help that we've tried to provide. But the fundamental issue you're really getting to, and that other people have spoken to, are situations where houses are unlikely to be livable, or people have sound reasons for not wanting to live there, but there has not been damage. Now the truth is, and I'm not one to defend, trust me, big insurers and banks, the policies that you purchase weren't generally set up to deal with that scenario. So that is the gap that you are identifying. And so my response to you is that is complex, because someone does have to pay if we want to fix that problem. And the answer might be that it's unfair for you to have to pay all of that, but ultimately someone still has to pay. And it might be that other taxpayers have a role to play there. It might be that insurers have a role to play there. It might be that banks have a role to play there. But what we're talking about across an event like this, that's this big, and across all of the other events that we're going to have in the future, and across all of the increased risk that we are managing, is potentially billions of dollars worth of assets falling into that situation. And so that's why the honest answer I have to give you is that I can't just put my hand on the table and say, yeah, we'll cover that, because that wouldn't be a responsible thing for me to say. But the work that we have underway with the task force is about trying to deal with exactly the problem and the gap that you have identified. And the commitment that I can give you is that we're looking at it genuinely and that we are fast tracking as much as possible to try and get that assurance to you as quickly as we can.
Thank you. So can I go, I'm sorry to keep you.
Yes, my question was probably around the expedience of reassessment. There's 108 registered homes, I think, in Muriwai at the moment. Of them, there might be, I don't know, 20 which we know will never be lived, or realistically looking at them, they're never going to be lived in again. For those 20 homes, perhaps 30, I don't know. Could you see some way of expediting the, we'll put blank sticker homes for one of the better word. Do you think there may be some way of expediting with the central government and the local government, the fact that they're a write-off, sure, and expediting those people?
I think that's what we would be wanting to get through this rapid assessment process that we're getting into now. And as I said before, it's basically about matching up the information that local government has with the information that insurers have, because to be honest, across this area, they've often actually got the best information. Their job is to understand and manage risk. So that's a process that we're going through now. We're trying to push that through pretty quickly so that they are on the job now. We've set up technical expertise that are attached to the task force to assist with that work, and they'll be working closely with councils to assess it. One of the things that we have recognised within this is that there are different levels of risk, different levels of damage, and frankly, different levels of difficulty that people are in at the moment. It's just not viable. So broadly speaking, yes.
Can I go to you, sir?
Sure. So my question is actually very similar to that. My name's Andy and I've got a property in Maine. Well, unless someone wants to buy it. So around that, you basically try to answer that there's collaborating on the process for the black sticker houses. You know, it's pretty clear what our outcome is and what is that like process. You talk about a time period, you talk about precedent, Aussie, etc. And what is that process that you're going through? Who makes those decisions? And it was mentioned about a buyout between council and EQC. Like, who makes those decisions and what are the steps they're taking?
Conducting full risk assessments across these areas. So your community, but across Auckland, I think I heard before, we're down to about 500 red stickered houses. But as you know, that isn't actually always the sole measure of risk. There'll be some houses which are red stickered, were actually after the events. It's been getting refined over recent weeks as you've seen that number come down as more bespoke risk assessments are done. And now we're supplementing it with the insurance company process. So we would hope that in the coming weeks, we start to build out that really strong picture as to what risk looks like across the affected areas. So that's sort of the first stage of the process. That's our information base. The second stage of the process really is one that we as a government are working through, which is to say, once we know that we will have some houses where you're in that situation where it isn't viable for someone to live there anymore. What do we do about that? And so that is a policy process. We're not waiting to get the risk information in. We've got officials working on that at the moment, looking at overseas exemplars, looking at what we've done, for example, in New Zealand, we've dealt with these situations in places like Matata, Westport and Christchurch in different ways, and trying to put a framework in place that will be fair and that gets support to people where it's needed. as I say, because of the significance of those decisions, I can't be specific about what that looks like. But in overseas jurisdictions, there have been partial or full buyout processes that have worked. We are going to look at that suite of options and try and land on something that's fair.
Minister, I know that one of your assistants is probably 5 minutes. I hate to tell you that because I think he could be here most of the night.
I will also apologise for being slightly late at the beginning. The person who was driving me took me up to the golf club to begin with. And so I started going around the table saying, oh, hey, how it's going. I was just about to realize
We've got a Zoom. Somebody is zooming us in, and so we have a quick call. Then I'd like to go to you, sir, and finish with you. Okay. I'd love to have more, I really would, but the ministers.
He'll be back, surely.
I'll be back. And so the other thing it's just really finishing off the previous question. What we'll also do is we'll ask someone from the task force to come over here sometime soon as well. So I think you might find that a valuable conversation.
It's not all over though. We've got the team here. So the Zoom.
Okay, so this question has come online. Can someone please answer? On Domain Crescent, there are a number of white stickered houses which are accessed through a road which has red stickered houses stickered due to the land instability on the slope above on both sides. How can the safe access to the white stickered houses be guaranteed, but no access to the red stickered houses on the same road?
Is that,
Any of the local team specifically in there?
yes,
I'm Ross Robertson, I'm one of the Working Council's geotechnical engineers.
Make sure you speak right now.
The reason for the difference is that risk is a function of how long you're exposed to the hazard. When you're driving through a road, you're there for a matter of seconds. When you're living in your house there for many, many hours each day. So it makes a very big difference if you're in a house or if you're driving through a road. That's why the difference in the roads is taken.
I think the question is, how can there be white and red side by side in the same area? If you're saying that's not safe, but that is.
It's similar that there are different levels of risk on the same road because some of the properties are further away from the cliffs than others. So we've had a close look at the distances from the cliffs and the angles to the cliffs, looked at the differences, looked at how far the landslides might travel from the cliffs, and assessed each house individually to work out what the individual risk is for the houses.
right. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne.
So we talked about the 100 odd houses that are red stickered at the moment, which 40 odd are kind of blindly obviously not going to be viable. But it's possible that all of those 100 may be not viable as we go through this. And when that happens, all those people have to move out of the area because there are no other houses to move into. And those, well, they can't afford to because they bought them at, $100,000 30 years ago, right? So what happens is the community dissolves. We've got teachers, we've got firefighters, we've got surf guards, lifeguards, we've got the heart of the community lives in those houses. And when that happens, they have to move out of the area. Unless there is available for houses to be built without wrecking the place. But that rezoning, I think, might have to be put on the table as part of your planning. Is that something that's being discussed from a legislative point of view to enable us to stay in our community?
I think that the point you raise in general is a really important one here, but also in other smaller communities that have been badly hit. You're here because you love the space, you have relationships with people, and you need a certain critical mass for a community to function. You mentioned some of the key roles and people that you need to keep things ticking along. And if you take that bigger proportion out of a community, you can really knock the place for 6. The way that we're working through this process, in broad terms, I kind of think of in about 3 phases. So the first phase post the emergency events was really just the emergency response. Are people safe? So if people got a roof over their heads when they're going to sleep tonight, get the key roads open so we can get supplies in and out. That was phase 1, pretty much through that. Few things outstanding from that. Phase 2, which is probably the one that we're right in the guts of at the moment, is rebuilding some of the core infrastructure and addressing basic needs. So getting roads open, community facilities open, making sure the insurance processes are getting underway, housing's beginning to be dealt with. Sort of getting the basics, sort of as much as possible, getting things back to where they were for people. Phase 3, which we're not really at yet, but the thinking is beginning to evolve in, is really what you're saying and a couple of others of you have said, which is what does the future look like? And that's partly about the resilience. How do we make sure that as much as possible we can deal with this stuff as it happens more and more? But actually, what is life going to be like for communities? There'll be some tough, I've got to be honest with you, some tough discussions as part of that. It might be that in some parts of the country, and please, I'm not saying here, in some parts of the country, it might be that it isn't that safe or sustainable for a community to remain where it is. And that's going to be a reality we're going to have to deal with. And that's the pointy end of managed retreat. But then there'll be other situations where we might need to say, we need to think about this community differently. We need to find slightly different places to live. So that's the Westport example. We've largely built a big part of Westport in a different place to where it was before to make sure that that community could continue, and the state had a large role in making that happen. So what I'm saying is I acknowledge the point you're making. We need to work with you there. That will be complex. There'll be questions about, well, where would you do it? What are the public land holdings? What are the private land holdings? Who pays? All of that stuff we'll have to work through. Again, most of that will be led locally. It needs to be led locally because it's you and the community and council who have the most knowledge there. But it will need to be that something that government is there to support and as required. Again, Phil, I don't know if there's anything you would want to add to the early thinking in this space, either general terms or as pertains to Muriwai.
In general terms, I'm aware of that possibility. We're aware of it. We're not very advanced in terms of thinking about how that would work, and I think there has to be a very significant conversation with the community about how it would work in terms of retaining character and where the development would be and so on. So, yeah, acknowledge it, and we're comfortable working on it with the community.
Can I go to you? And I think that may be the last. Sorry.
I'm going to make it a good evening. I would like to revisit and emphasise the underlying causes of the land slips that we've just had and the need to mitigate future risk of the same issue reoccurring. In 1965, there was a landslip in the main prison that took 2 lives. Council said afterwards that they would never build there again. They have built there again, and look what happened to those houses. The hydrology and the geology of this area, well, I'm not an expert, clearly it's problematic, and council infrastructure has not adequately dealt with those issues. And how can we be sure that in the future, the remediation work is done on that infrastructure that removes the risk that we still currently face?
Thank you. Look, this really builds off the previous question. It's how do you plan for long-term resilience in communities? Yeah, a good understanding of the risks, the right infrastructure, and accountability. I mean, I'll say, in all honesty, the accountability spreads broadly. So, council are, in most respects, the agency that provides core infrastructure, and obviously has the planning function. Private property owners do also have a responsibility in terms of their assessment of risks and what they're doing in different places as well. And central government obviously has an overall responsibility for well-being as well. So I wouldn't just point the finger at council. I think we've got to come together and say, well, in this community, what do we understand the risks to be? What are the lessons we've learned out of this event? And one of the things that I always think about in these situations, we try and work off as good information as we have. But that is whether it's central government, local government, we never have perfect information. So, across our roading network, for example, our state highway network, we had, before the series of events, we thought we knew where the biggest risks were, where we were most prone to big slips that would happen along the state highway network if there were big weather events. Some of that was right, but actually State Highway 25A at the Coromandel, none of the information we previously had said that was a big risk site.
geotech people can do to provide that assurance around the risks that people have identified. Okay, so I'll pick that up and we'll include something in further communications.
On your behalf, can I thank the Minister for coming? Thank you. Chris and Vanessa, thank you too.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we've been relatively silent partners, but can I actually just say across the political aisle, and the Minister made a point before about it not being a matter for playing politics. I think he's answered a lot of very diverse questions in a really helpful manner. So I think you should agree with me as local MPs. And yes, they are the decision makers, and they do, there is a synergy with local government, but it's for the government of the day to put forward the solutions, and politicians on the other side of the aisle should support those constructively, and we will. But more to the point, as a local MP, I can now help you with those avenues that are being set up, and to ensure that you get those answers and that satisfaction that you have within those structures they're setting up. And if there are further gaps, then it's our role to feed that back to the government as well. So thank you all for being here. I'll look to come back either here or the golf club, and right, whichever way it is, within the next couple of weeks. And I won't put Vanessa on the spot, but she might be keen to do the same. In the meantime, thanks to Chris.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm not going to take up a lot of your time. We spoke a couple of weeks back when community law was here as well. But just to thank the Minister for coming and say we've allocated capacity, as I know a lot of you know, within my office to help, just however we can help. Many of you know Angus. We're in direct contact with Kenton and with Jeremy as well. And so it's just a question to you of whatever we can do to help. At the moment, I see that as helping each of you individually navigate individual form filling and giving to the right services. We can either do that, our elected officers, or we can connect you with community law. The second is identifying gaps in the services, which we can raise with entities and individuals who are able to make decisions about whether the policies stretch far enough. And the third piece, which many of you have spoken about today, which is the future focus. And for me, that's about just being the constant ear on the ground so that I can communicate with the ministers as we go through the next several months. So
you ring the council tomorrow and ask them when they're going to do the drains.
Yes.
And put an eye on them until they do.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. You've been terrific, and I salute you.
Folks, I just thank you for this discussion. Bob's one of the great sages of Tamaki Makaurau, and he summed it up beautifully at the beginning when he said it's been shitty. And you will be feeling that more than most Aucklanders. Like, it's okay to feel emotional about the stuff at times. My community back over in Roskilde, basically, the stream flooded in our area, and it was pretty much the poorest people in my community that lost everything around their houses. Wasn't me, but a lot of people close to me. So I know how many of you will be feeling. I know just acknowledging that doesn't fix stuff. But I just really want to convey to you that we know you're one of the communities that's been hit hard, and both council and government want to be here shoulder to shoulder with you. We're trying to answer all the questions as quickly as we can. We haven't been able to do all of that today, but we are really committed to continue working on this with you and to unlock some of those difficult problems that you're experiencing. This is one of the gems of Auckland, this place, and you're a gem of a community. So we want to support you to be resilient and keep on doing your causes for many years to come. So thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Just close the meeting for you, but